Hey everybody, this is Tracy here to recap Welcome to Sweetie Pies, Season 4, Episode 3, Behind the Wall. Before we get started, I am extremely exhausted, if you can't look at me and tell. I am going on about 2 hours of sleep in the past 36 hours, and for some reason, my body has not crashed, but I feel like it's coming on. So I'm going to go ahead and try and get this review done because I'm already about 3 days late. So the show opens in St. Louis and picks up where we left off last week. They're on the street called Natural Bridge. And so we kind of get a history of Natural Bridge and its reputation in St. Louis. And Miss Robbie explains the significance of the road and its painful history to the family. And she says that it's a street that's notorious for crime and where Andre, Tim's dad, and Linda's son, Aaron, who we found out last week was also murdered. All three of them died on, I think, within like 4 blocks of each other on this same street. So Miss Robbie looks at the signs lining the streets proclaiming we must stop killing each other, and says that although it's true, they are just signs. And so it reminds me, because here in St. Petersburg, the city actually has a campaign going on that I have yet to figure out what the campaign does, but I do see the signs all over town, and it says, not my son. And it was in response to between November and December of last year, I think there were 7 teens and young adults that were senselessly murdered here. So they drive 2 blocks away from where Andre was murdered, and Tim shares that it was the spot where his father was murdered. And Miss Robbie, tells the story that she was 2 months pregnant with Tim, so Tim never got to meet his dad. When someone who was possibly a passenger in the car put a gun, I think she said, to the side of his head, but it was like behind his ear in this area, and pulled the trigger. And so I don't think, from the way they were talking, that anybody was ever arrested for that murder either. And so I'm just thinking, Miss Robbie, like, my God, how much pain and heartache can one person experience? Because she had to go identify Andre's body. She had to identify Andre's father's body. She had to identify Tim's father's body, and she also had to go down and identify her nephew Aaron's body when he was murdered. And so Tim recalls, how he received the message that Aaron had been killed. He said that he was out playing basketball, and when he came in, they had a message that he needed to call home. And so when he called home, he was thinking that Miss Robbie was about to tell him that Aaron had been arrested. But instead, she told him that, Aaron had been killed. And he talked about how horrible he felt, because here he was in prison, and, he couldn't be there with his mom to provide her with comfort. So just a sad, horrible situation, no matter how you look at it. This episode highlighted the long-ranging effects of gun violence and the impact on the families and the communities, as we talked about in last week's episode, because this is the third episode, and in each episode, they've still been dealing with Andre's death, and I think it's intentional to just highlight and bring attention to, all these killings that's going on. And, I'll be the first one to jump up and complain about, police killing unarmed black men, but I also, have to say, that a lot is going on in our own communities that we need to deal with. And poverty, lack of education, lack of jobs plays a huge role in what we're seeing taking places in inner cities. Oh, and one more thing that Miss Robbie pointed out that I thought was just so poignant is that Andre, so her son name was Andre Montgomery. He was killed, and then Andre, his son has been killed, and she was basically saying that that's the end of that family line. That's the end of that bloodline. And think about it, Tim, God forbid something happened to Tim or his little son, TJ, that would pretty much be the end of their family line. So not only are people out in the streets killing each other, but it's like genocide. They're ending their bloodlines. And if guys are getting killed, I think she said Aaron didn't have any kids and he's dead, so there's no one to carry on his name. And I think he was the only son of Linda is his mom, and so end of that bloodline. So just real crazy. The show switches over to California, with the stupidity they have going on out there. But by the time they got to the California people, it was a welcome relief because although I appreciate what they're doing, it was just so heart wrenching. And it's Saturday night, and the last thing you want to do is be sitting in front of the TV being, sad because of everything that they're talking about. So, the folks, in the California, what's it called, TJ's, they messing up the recipes, too much salt, too much sugar, too much vinegar in the collard greens. I'm like, don't y'all have recipes that y'all follow? It's like, there's so much mayhem going on in that restaurant that I don't even know how they open the doors. And so, speaking of the messiness in cooking the food, that kitchen, I don't understand how they could have all those people back there working in that tiny workspace and they got all that crap stacked up to the ceiling. I would be so afraid that something would fall over on me trying to work in that environment. But, maybe it's part of the appeal of the show. So Charles and Chef Clark get into a disagreement because I think somebody called in and she told Charles that he had to stay. And, and Charles was talking back and being flip mouth. And come to find out, he didn't even know what day of the week it was. Chef Clark was telling him that it was Thursday, and he was arguing with her that it was Wednesday, but I think it really was Thursday. And so, Chef Clark, she can't catch a break with the crew. They're trying to undermine her at every turn. And the one girl, Lala, she says she was written up. Well, let me back up. Chef Clark said that people were coming to work and they were dirty and nasty, I guess. And so she was telling the workers, like, if you see one of your coworkers coming through the door and they're not right, that they're not clean or they're messy, let them know that they need to go home and change, because if I get to them, it's not going to be pretty. So then the next scene we have Lala is pulling Chloe outside to say that she was written up because she had said to a coworker, that they were doing something wrong. So there was no way she was going to tell somebody, that they weren't clean or presentable when they come to work. And then when Chloe gets in her confessional, she done changed the story all around, talking about Lala said that she was written up for telling somebody that they weren't clean. And so I was just like, y'all are so messy and just all over the place. And so when Tim returns to California, he finds that, pretty much nothing has changed. And there was a scene where Chloe and Charles were trying to talk about Chef Clark, and he picks up this employee manual and he asked them did they know what that was, and they was like, oh yeah, some mess Chef Clark brought in. And so he handed it to him and told them, why don't y'all go and read it. And so he wasn't ready for the foolishness, but they like met him out the gate. So then there was a scene with had to do with somebody calling in again and the message not being relayed properly. Chef Clark said that the person told her that they would be in, and then Bruce was saying that the guy told him that he wasn't coming in. And I think even though the editing might have cut it out, I was left believing that maybe the guy had talked to Charles and Charles didn't relay the message. So what Tim decided to do was to give everybody specific tasks, that they would be responsible for, in hopes that it would cut down on some of the conflict and confusion. And so we see Tim, and he's with the general contractor. He's trying to open up 2 new restaurants. And the guy is telling him that the one restaurant, he still has about 3 weeks left. And on the other restaurant, that it's going to take at least 30 days to get the permits approved, let alone, how much time. So it's going to be several months before they can complete the work and get that one open. And so when Tim asked him, how much money does he think it's going to be to finish the one restaurant, the guy told him between $78,000 and $80,000. And I'm like, God, dog, I hope you own those buildings, because to me it is just crazy to be putting that kind of money into somebody else's building. But it also reminded me, because I keep telling y'all about how these shows must be have the same writers, and that they just, same storylines going on. Because in Real Housewives of Atlanta, Candy and Todd were pretty much having the same conversation, because Todd is like 3 months behind on opening their restaurant, and and it's costing them all this money. Excuse me, it's costing them all this money, and I think they even gave like the same line that as long as we're closed, we're not making money, we're just putting money out. So I don't know if OWN and Bravo got the same writers going on, but I need y'all to knock it off. I've been saying this several times. Like, we see it. So y'all do better. So back in St. Louis, Tim decided that he wanted to take Miss Robbie on a tour of the old Missouri State Penitentiary, to show her how he spent the 10 years of his life that he was locked up. And Tim said that he was facing 25, I think he said Class A felony charges at 17 years old. And so I think pretty much he was in prison for drug offenses. And so he said that because he was only 17, they gave him 12 years, but he really could have received 25, well, a life sentence on each one of the charges, which would have been 25 life sentences. So he had some serious charges on him. And so Miss Robbie, she was saying that this prison has, a lot of painful memories for her also, because not only was Tim locked up there, but she said that her brother had been arrested and spent time there, and that Tim's brother, I guess would be Andre's dad, who was killed, that he also served prison there. And she said that there was a time when she used to just pray, for the day that she didn't have to make that trip any longer. And so I was just like, what must it be like for a mother to have a 17-year-old child in a maximum security prison? And so, yeah, the title for this episode was fitting, Behind the Wall. And like Tim said, that the dorm that he lived in was called the Thunderdome. And so, he was explaining that. And so, it was just horrible, and the place was just disgusting. I think he said they didn't have air conditioning or heating. So could you imagine, like in the summertime, what the heat must have been like? And then it probably was, cold in the wintertime. And I mean, like the bars were all rusted and decayed. And oh my God, it was just terrible. Like, oh, I didn't want to think about it, But Tim said that going to prison saved his life, and it molded him into being the man, that he is today. And so, unfortunately, many people don't have the opportunities that Tim has, because Miss Robbie said that the reason she started the Sweetie Pie franchises was to give, Tim wasn't able to get a job when he got out of prison. And so she started the restaurant so that he would have a job. And I'm thinking, not everybody has parents that can do that for them. And I think it's a noble idea, that Tim is trying to open all these restaurants around the country so that he can give people jobs that, society, has kind of like thrown away and wouldn't hire. And so, one more thing about the prison. Um, the prison that he was in housed the gas chamber for, I guess, the state of Missouri. And he was saying, how he could have be having lunch with somebody one day, and that person's like death, what do they call it? Um, is it the death warrant that they sign? Whatever the governor signs that says that, they can go ahead and kill you. Like these guys would have already gotten that paper and know that, at Friday at 4 o'clock that they're going to be executed. But they would be in the general population and, hanging out with people knowing that, in 2 days you were going to die. And I just, like I say, just stuff I can't even begin to wrap my brain around. So the rest of the show was pretty, just minor scenes, like Miss Robbie met with her sisters Jan and Linda, and regarding the reopening of the original Sweetie Pies on West Florissant. And as many people know, that restaurant was closed after they decided they weren't going to charge. I think that's when they had the riots, when they announced that they weren't going to file charges against Darren Wilson in the murder of Mike Brown, and all that rioting took place. And they were showing how like all these businesses around them were burned down, but they didn't touch Sweetie Pies. So Jan is reopening that Sweetie Pies, and she's going to run that business. And then Linda is going to run the upper crust location. And then Miss Robbie says she's going to focus her time on her Hamburger Heaven location that she's about to open. And but she said she ain't gonna be there long because she got other things to do. So I guess the main goal is to get the right people in to help work in all the different restaurants. So then we move on to cousin Michelle, and remember she's working at the can't think of the name of it, but they have like two other restaurants. And so cousin Michelle was at one of the restaurants thinking that the other restaurant was going to be okay the couple of days she was gone. But honey, let me tell you, she came back and there was dirty dishes stacked up to the ceiling. The food wasn't right. She said that, it was time to open and the macaroni and cheese wasn't ready. And she said that the macaroni and cheese is their signature dish, and that some people just come for that. And I'm thinking, why the macaroni and cheese ain't ready? That should have been the first thing that they cooked. And so, if your macaroni and cheese is your signature dish, and you don't have any macaroni and cheese, then why are you opening? Because that's sort of like the day I went to McDonald's and they were out of fries, and I looked at the girl and was like, so why y'all here? Like, who is really coming to McDonald's to buy something to eat and y'all ain't got no french fries? So anyway, she did, I guess what any good manager would do, she pulled up her sleeves and she got to washing them dishes. And it also took me back to my first job was at a nursing home. My aunt was the manager of the dietary department, so she hired, my siblings and I and all of her kids. We all got our start at that nursing home, William and Mary Nursing Home. And honey, let me tell you what was going on in that Sweetie Pie's kitchen. Never would have took place at William and Mary. So Tim decides that he wants to take the family on vacation. And so everybody's going to go to Universal Studios here in Florida. And so his real reason, well, it's TJ's birthday. So that's the reason he gave that they were getting together for this vacation. But the real reason is that he wanted to get them all together because he wants everybody to move to California, which I don't know how that's going to work, because who are you going to leave in St. Louis to run those restaurants? Because, based on what we see on the show, none of those people could run those restaurants for y'all. And so we get a little glimpse at Janae and TJ as they're packing for the trip. What it's like co-parenting with Tim, to keep TJ's life stable. So I think that's good. And we need to hear more and more about fathers who do stay in the home and who do the right thing. And maybe they can be an example to other fathers. And so, that was pretty much the show. And like I say, very emotional, but much needed episode. So what do you guys think will help stop the gun violence in inner cities? Or is it pretty much a lost cause? Because I think if you follow the economy, things are not getting better on the job front. And so if people are already being oppressed because there are no jobs and they're dropping out of school, and the jobs that they could get, requires education, but they can't get into college, so it's like a vicious cycle. So, tell me what you think, and any ideas you might have on, what can help our future generations. So let's get the conversation started. Leave your comments below. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel, and much love and have a great week. Bye-bye.